Hi, sorry, I just stepped out for a minute.
Yeah, that's okay, Krish. How are you?
Doing well.
Great.
Looking forward to this.
Yeah, definitely. So, we're just starting now, basically. We're hoping that Nancy will be able to join us. She's taking on an assignment for, she works in the government, in the presidency, in the DRC, so she kind of gets busy sometimes. So hopefully she will join us. She's one of our senior research fellows. So I just want to say good morning and good afternoon and good evening to everyone, depending on where you are joining us from. We are very excited to have all of you join us for today's webinar, put together by the Africa-China Center for Policy and Advisory, ACCPA, in partnership with the Sino-Africa Insider, which is a news magazine strictly focusing on Africa-China relations. Today, we are going to be discussing a very important issue in international development space, which has become a very important discussion as far as international development and development cooperation are concerned. And so we're very much excited that today we've been able to put together a panel of experts in their own rights based on different experiences and disciplines to share their perspective with us on this very important discussion. So for those that are new to us, the Africa-China Center for Policy and Advisory, ACCPA, is a policy research think tank headquartered in Ghana. We have teams in the DRC, in Tanzania, in Botswana, in Ethiopia, of course in the UK as well, and China. So, and of course headquartered in Ghana, in Accra, Ghana. The aim of the think tank is to uplift the African agency when it comes to knowledge production and research that goes to the core of policy of African governments. Main focus is on the African development agenda. So how do we bring out, perspectives that we believe can help shape African development journey, especially when it comes to the continent's engagement with China. So that has been our main focus. And of course, we're doing this through various means, research, publications, and of course, dialogues or meetings, just like we have here today, which we believe is also very important to help us to unpack, even from our own side perspective as a think tank, but also bringing on different, personalities and resource persons to share their own perspective as well, which we believe is very important and goes to the core of the work that we do. So this is why today we're very excited to have these distinguished individuals that are going to help us understand and unpack very important discussion in the international development space, which is the BRICS, the BRICS, BRICS Plus now, because now we have more than additional countries that are part of the BRICS that is going to unpack to understand what that means. So today, our work is very simple. I have three guests or panelists, and what we'll do is that I will introduce our panelists, and then each panel member will give a brief intro about their own perspective, whatever angle that they want to pick for the first 10 or so minutes. And after that, we will have a Q&A session. I will ask them a follow-up questions. And then we invite you, the participants, to come in. It is very important. We want to ensure that all of you are taking part in the discussion. So for that to happen, you will have to use the Q&A button, which is on the Zoom app. If you're familiar with that, if you have a Q&A button there, please use that to send through your questions. And when it's time, I'll read these questions out to our speakers so that they can help us address them. So, and then of course, we'll round up the discussion. So that is the format that we are taking. Again, I want it to be very participatory. So if you have questions beforehand, you can start dropping them in, but in the course of the discussion, if your question come up, please do send them through by the Q&A session. So today, again, we are going to be focused on a very important issue, which is the BRICS. So in October last month, the BRICS summit was held in Kazan in Russia. And it's now the time where we've seen the new BRICS members, the UAE, Ethiopia, Egypt, and Iran, who then join officially as BRICS members. And of course, during the BRICS summit last year, there were additional countries like Saudi Arabia and of course Argentina. So different perspective in terms of when they are officially joining the BRICS or not. In the case of Argentina, as you already know, Saudi Arabia is still weighing its options, but for now, the 4 have joined the 5 original members. And as we will see, the 5 original members of BRICS are also part of the G20, all of them, in terms of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. So we are looking at a very significant bloc in terms of everything geopolitics, everything in economic operations, everything association, and everything influence when it comes to our world today. So whilst originally they were refuted or they were kind of brushed, off and put on the table, now we are witnessing something different. The momentum is building up, as we've seen in the last couple of years, as far as the BRICS is concerned, and of course, trying to chart an alternative path to developments and not follow the usual traditional system that we're used to, which is mostly Western-led, basically. So when you read through the objectives and everything around how the BRICS is structured and the objective and what they're trying to achieve, one can sense that they're very much interested in an alternative path to development to the ones that we're used to. And in the context of that, of course, we are going to look at the African continent, which is also a very significant block when it comes to global South, because the BRICS feed into the South-South cooperation agenda, as we've seen, which is also gaining momentum instead of the usual North-South cooperation. So we are seeing a huge momentum in the South-South cooperation, and the BRICS epitomizes this very South-South cooperation very much, as we've seen the composition of the countries, which are usually not traditionally part of the usual Western bloc, which is usually North American or European, kind of bloc. So it is coming very much well as a very significant bloc, and we're interested in the context of Africa, what it means for Africa in the course of course, we have South Africa, now we have Egypt, and now we have Ethiopia, which are all significant in their own right. As you've seen, the track the economies of these 3 countries, they're very much at the top of the hierarchy in terms of African development journey. So you have South Africa, Egypt, and Ethiopia in there, but we just want to broaden it to the context of Africa. What does it mean for the African development trajectory in terms of the significance of the rise of the BRICS? What can Africa do differently, to be able to ensure that in the midst of all these debates and the rise of the BRICS and how significant they are becoming, and at the end of the day, Africa is also positioning itself well to ensure that they benefit, because that's our objective anyways, and do the right things. So what will be the policy implications, going forward? What should be the path? What are the do's and the don'ts when it comes to Africa's, involvement or position when it comes to the BRICS? So that's what we are here to do, together with our panelists, to unpack this very important discussion. So again, I want to use this opportunity to welcome everyone that has joined us, for today's webinar. Again, brought to you by the Africa China Center for Policy and Advisory, ACCP, together with our partner, Sino Africa Insider. Now, I will take this opportunity to introduce our panelists who have joined us today. So we have 2 that have already joined, and I'll just briefly introduce them. So our first is Krish Shetty. Krish is a Senior Research Manager at the Human Science Research Council. It's also based in South Africa, if I'm not wrong. And Krish he holds a master's qualification in Knowledge and Information Management from the University of Stellenbosch, and a PhD candidate in the Computer Science Department at Nelson Mandela University. His PhD study concentrates on the developing partnership strategy for South Africa and Chinese incubators and accelerators to accelerate entrepreneurship development across the African continent. So as you can see, he's already very well interested in doing some research in the space. His research interest lies in the social applications of smart technologies, contribute to the eradication inequality and unemployment. He previously worked in the HSRC, the same resource, Human Sciences Research Council, BRICS Research Center, representing South Africa in several BRICS academic events. So prior to being part of the academia, he worked as a data architect for various South African financial institutions, including the Financial and Fiscal Commission, First National Bank, and Alan Gregg. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're very excited to have Krish join us. I met Krish, some few months ago when doing his one of his research work, and very interesting discussion on the work that he's doing. So the next speaker that we have is Dr. Emmanuel Matambo, also a very good friend of mine. He is with the China-Africa Research Center at the University of Johannesburg. So he began his tertiary experience at St. Joseph's Theoretical Institute in 2009 with a Bachelor of Arts magna cum laude in philosophy in 2011. He got his master's, an honors degree, from the KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. His research is interested in China-Africa relations and emerged after his degree. His master's dissertation was on China-South Africa relations. His doctoral dissertation, also done at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, was a constructivist analysis of Sino-Zambian relations. So that is the sort of speakers that we have who have joined us for now. We are waiting for our third speaker to join us if she's able to. So Emmanuel comes from the China-Africa Center, China-Africa Research Center at the University of Johannesburg. And of course, I know him very much, and Krish also joined us from the Human Sciences Research Council in South Africa. So ladies and gentlemen, we're very privileged to have our speakers join us. Now, as I said earlier, our speakers will give the first, give them the chance to share their perspective broadly on the topic that we have for today in terms of what we think, in terms of Africa and the BRICS in a multipolar world, strategic diplomacy and partnerships. So that's the topic that we are looking at. And each of them will come from a different angle. It's an open discussion. After that, before we come in to ask them some various questions, and of course, you can also come in as a participant. So, Krish, you joined first. I don't know if you would like to go first. I think you wanted to focus on, you did mention earlier, you mentioned that you want to focus on the knowledge exchange, right, in terms of the BRICS and Africa. I think it's very interesting aspect to look at when almost everything focuses on the big numbers, the big economic, kind of cooperation that happens at the top, but very much so in terms of knowledge exchange. I think it's also very important that we delve deeper to understand what kind of opportunities that are in there, and the challenges, the risk involved when it comes to knowledge exchange between Africa and the BRICS. So you have the floor now to share. I don't know whether you want to share PPT or just want to share.
Thank you, Paul. I've got a few slides that I want to put up, so I'll just put that on now. Thanks for inviting me today, Paul, to this dialogue. I think it's a very important discussion for us to have. As you indicated, my name is Krish Chetty. I'm a researcher at the Human Sciences Research Council in South Africa. I'm based in Cape Town. I also contribute to the South African BRICS think tank, and I've been participating in the BRICS Academic Forum for a number of years now. Currently, I'm also doing some research on partnership building and knowledge sharing between Africa and China. So I hope I can try and share some of those ideas that I've been able to gain from that study here today. Another project that we're involved in that might be useful to this discussion is that we're preparing a book right now on the concept of multipolarity in BRICS, and we're trying to unpack what this means. And if all goes according to plan, we hope to launch this in early 2026. But if there's anybody that's here today that'd like to contribute, please do reach out. We'd love to chat and see how we can work together. So for my contribution today, colleagues, I'd like to discuss firstly some of the challenges that I think we've experienced on the continent, specifically in relation to us achieving inclusive economic growth and meaningful development. And then I'd also like us to consider what opportunities exist now as more of our African countries start to join the BRICS framework, and how do we then position ourselves to make the most of these opportunities? So to begin, I've got a few bullet points here. I'll just try and quickly go over them just to get the discussion going. I'd like to begin by understanding what has been holding us back on the continent. Inclusive economic growth isn't something new. We've been talking about this, thinking about this for a long time, but somehow it seems our efforts on the continent are blocked. So my first point then, I guess, relates to our very imbalanced power relationship that we have with the so-called developed world. I think we must acknowledge that we've had very little power in negotiating trade deals. So when we negotiate with the Western international financial institutions, many of our trade agreements have often come with strings attached. And these conditions then, tie the hands of our governments. The austerity conditions that you see within them, or however they try to interpret whatever good governance means, that limits our ability often to set policies that work in the best interests of our people. And so we've got to figure out how do we address this power imbalance. And then if you think about our current trade agreements, many of them have their roots in the colonial era. And this, I guess, has led to deep economic lock-in effects. So many of our trade deals then focus on us exporting raw materials rather than the finished good. And so this also is then trapping us in the cycle of dependency on the West. So to change this, we've got to move beyond this extractive economy and think about how we perhaps export better resources, or more productive resources. Our next big challenge, I guess, is fragmentation. The continent has 55 countries, and that means 55 different markets. Each market has its own set of rules and costs, and this makes it difficult for us to do business across the continent. And because you are focusing on your very small market, this makes your business less competitive across the continent. And so that's what constrains innovation, makes investors reluctant to invest in your business and so on. So we've really got to look to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. That agreement, I think, is crucial. Its success is crucial, and that by building a unified market, this will help us try to even the playing field and spark opportunities for new innovation. The next point I wanted to make is about the scale of the informal sector that we have on the continent. It makes it really tough for us to implement tax reforms to try and broaden the tax base because of the size of the informal sector in our countries. And then this limits our ability to then fund new services and infrastructure. And so we've got to think about how do we break that cycle as well. On top of that, there's issues of capacity, technical expertise that we need to implement the policies for promoting innovation. And so many of our countries, we just don't have that institutional memory or that technical capacity to carry out those complex institutional reforms that are needed. So, if we build a skilled workforce, that should be crucial for our long-term success. Then we've got to think about the cost of technology. For many African countries, acquiring and adapting new technologies is expensive. It's expensive to change systems. Many countries have just implemented 2G or 3G networks, and we need to have that live for a while before we can invest or upgrade and transition up to 5G. And it's that pace of change is another constraining factor. And then my last point I want to make here is about currency volatility. When exchange rates fluctuate, it makes it very difficult for us to do economic modeling. It becomes very unpredictable, if not impossible at times. And so with that volatility, your imports get pricier, your exports lose their competitive advantage. And securing loans also becomes very difficult, and these are those red flags for the investors. So giving that understanding of Africa's challenges, the question is, how do we benefit from working from the BRICS? Firstly, we'll see BRICS is introducing several new interventions that are meant to challenge the restrictions, particularly related to the traditional global financial architecture. The work begins with the BRICS New Development Bank, which offers development financing loans that you'll find are more favorable with less conditions compared to what the World Bank or the IMF offers. Those loans generally have more restrictive conditions, and they make it difficult for us to implement our priorities. Then, if we think beyond financial autonomy issues, BRICS can also play a critical role in us breaking our dependency on raw material exports. And so if BRICS can help us facilitate access to new markets connected to the BRICS countries, to the BRICS networks, our African resources perhaps can become more competitive. As you'll find, then it's the BRICS and the West that need to vie for the best deal. And so they've got to then make the most appealing offer, which increases the competitivity of our resources. And next, if you look at BRICS, particularly China, through the Belt and Road Initiative, they are very much interested in investing in infrastructure like the ports and the railways that we need, and this could drive industrialization and potentially create jobs. If we work closely with BRICS as well, we could also address Africa's skills gaps. And so there's an array of technology transfer programs which are being introduced, and these are new initiatives that need further development and expansion. But if we accept their objectives, they are implemented. And if they do get implemented in an inclusive manner, they could perhaps be applied to enhance our technological capacity and help us build a competitive edge. In the financial sector, we're well aware in the BRICS of the issues related to currency fluctuations and our dollar dependency. And so there's a program there to try and shift away from the dollar. And so this is a global problem, not just an African problem. And so we're seeing things like new alternative payment systems, which are being gradually introduced. And these are the systems that could promote de-dollarization and provide us with alternatives to the SWIFT. And then finally, you'll see that BRICS is also introducing some innovative programs that perhaps can support our markets related to grain and commodities exchanges. These are things initiated by Russia, but potentially could then help us stabilize the agricultural markets. And then, so how should we now engage with BRICS? We understand these opportunities are there. The question is, how do we engage with them practically? So it starts by understanding how BRICS itself is structured, and I've learned this in being involved in the BRICS Academic Forum. There's multiple tracks that are in operation across the member countries, and there's specialized events that are focused on government engagement, academia, business, civil society, finance, and others. You also find learning platforms like the BRICS Energy and Research Cooperation Platform, which is used to exchange knowledge. So you'll see it's not just one big meeting which happens with BRICS, with the heads of state summits. It's these series of events that happen across the calendar year. And you've got to figure out, how do we start engaging at these particular events to have our voice be heard? I think it's also important that we try to speak with one voice. One of the most powerful things I think we can do is coordinate our positions in the lead up to these events. And when we speak with one voice, we will amplify our message. Then we've also got to think about, how do we engage just beyond the political level? Most of these interventions, these agreements that you see, they're happening at the political level, at the country level. We need to figure out how we take advantage of these at the individual level, at the entrepreneur level. And so what mechanisms do we need to create that will allow us to engage as small businesses, as innovators, with our partners in BRICS? And that also requires us to strengthen our local institutions. We need to also engage at home, not just at the BRICS level. So we need to have institutions and associations structured at home, which will allow us to participate and represent our organizations in these BRICS fora. Then we've got to think about, how do we bring this information back home once we engage at that level? So we've got to be strengthening our knowledge sharing networks. It's not just attending the big international event, it's bringing that information back home. And then my last point really is, my second last point, is on regional unity. So when we engage with BRICS, it needs to go hand in hand with us promoting regional integration and Pan-African unity. And so by working closely with the African Union, if we empower them to represent us, it will be in our best interest. And then lastly, as we're engaging in this space with BRICS, we really need to advocate for global financial reform. So I think BRICS gives Africa a platform to advocate for fairer global financial systems. And so we need to work with our BRICS partners to push for reforms to the global financial architecture so we can create a system that's fair and inclusive and supports development for all. Thanks, Paul. I hope that helps set the scene for the discussion.
Absolutely, Krish. That was very, very insightful and, of course, well structured, looking at the constraint that the continent is facing, shifting us into the opportunities that BRICS present, and, of course, merging the two on how Africa can really leverage on the BRICS to resolve some of these challenges that you already identified in the first phase of your business. I think that's very insightful. That set us on a very good track. I'll come to you again later for questions on the knowledge exchange and sharing opportunities. I think that is where you have a very good strength there. So we'll come back to you on that. So I will just welcome Emmanuel to also share his first insights on this very topic, Africa and the BRICS in a multipolar world. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you to the Africa-China Center for Policy and Advisory. I'm really glad and honored to be invited for this very important post-mortem of BRICS 2024. And thanks as well to Krish, who set a very good context on which I am going to build. And he was more pointed in looking at Africa and the BRICS. So I will look at BRICS 2024 from a global perspective. So this is how I structured my presentation. The first part of the presentation will look at the global context in which BRICS 2024 happened. And then the second part will look at the Kazan declaration. What exactly did the BRICS countries agreed to in Kazan? And then the third part will look at the concerns that I have about the Kazan Declaration and BRICS in general. And then the final part now will be more like zeroing in on what Krish has already said. So in October 2024, when the BRICS countries met in Russia, the world was in a state of flux, if I could call it that way. We were still unsure about what would happen in the United States elections, which eventually happened on the 5th of November. And we know the results. We can postulate about what the consequences for global politics and economics might be, starting with 20th January 2025. So there was that looming in the background of the BRICS summit. But a lot of people have not really spoken about something that happened in September 2024 at the United Nations General Assembly when the BRICS countries met and to discuss certain things such as global reform, the reform of the United Nations Security Council, and what had reportedly been agreed upon before the expansion of BRICS in 2023. The talks there deadlocked because Egypt and Ethiopia said they had not been told some of the things that were brought up in September 2024. For example, they were not told apparently that they would have to support South Africa, Brazil, and India joining the United Nations Security Council, for example. So those talks ended in gridlock, and that kind of set the background, so to say, to what was happening, what would happen eventually in October 2024. Another context that was prevalent at the time, obviously, was the host itself, Russia. Its president had not traveled to South Africa in 2023 when the BRICS membership was doubled. And that was because of the war that continues to rage in Ukraine and at the instigation, some people might say, of Russia. So that was the elephant in the room, by the way. Another factor that painted a troubling context against which the BRICS was hosted was the war in the Middle East. It was a war that was escalating. It was a war that brought in the United States, the states to some extent. So that also painted a damaging international picture, so to say, against which the BRICS was being held. And the escalation of the war, and most pointedly to BRICS, was Iran's involvement. Its missile strikes against Israel. Most of the strikes were repelled, but quite a sizable number of them actually hit the targets. So that was as well was in the background, what to do with Iran, which had just joined BRICS this year. So that was also in the playing its role in the background. Another factor as well was just the raging debate against global warming and the raging debate against maritime security as well. All five original members of the BRICS countries, countries that were coastal countries, they had massive sea lanes. South Africa, more than, I think, about 3,000 kilometers of its sea lanes. Brazil, about more than 7,000 kilometers of the coast and stuff like that. So that is an issue as well that was painting the background to BRICS. And I've already preempted the reform of the security systems in the world, such as the Security Council and governance systems as well, the international trade and trade currencies as well. The debates have been raging as well. What is the role that EMDCs, the emerging markets, and the developing countries could play in an increasingly polarized world at a political and a social level as well? So these are just some of the international contexts that formed the background to BRICS 2024. Now, coming to Kazan itself, the BRICS summit itself, what exactly happened? There were some things that I lauded the BRICS for being. One of those things is pragmatism. And this pragmatism could be extended as well to the pragmatism that was shown the month prior to BRICS at the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. For the first time, we saw African countries being assertive at the FOCAC in 2024. Most of the times we just go, Africans usually attend FOCAC meetings to rubber stamp whatever it is that China has written. And that is why yes.
We lost you a bit, I think, when you were coming to the main event in Kazan, that part. So if you can just start from there. Yeah.
All right. Am I clearer now?
Yes, but there's been some. Please.
Okay. All right. No problem. So I was just stating that when it came to BRICS 2024, what I really liked about it was the pragmatism of what was decided there. And this pragmatism, by the way, could be predated to the pragmatism that African countries showed when they met in China for the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation in September 2024. For the first time, we heard African countries being very assertive, being very exercising a lot of foresight as well. And that tone was set by President Cyril Ramaphosa when he met Xi Jinping on the 2nd of September. He was very forceful in saying we cannot continue ignoring the fact that there's a trade deficit between Africa, or South Africa in this case, and China, and that has to be faced. So that was a sign of Africa's maturity, Africa's assertiveness, but also Africa's comfort with China. When you can be frank with a friend, it shows that your friendship has matured. And we saw that pragmatism also in BRICS. There was not this flowery language about what the BRICS would do, but there was more continuity of what was agreed upon in Johannesburg last year. And the fact that there was not this rush, this impulsive rush to say, let us expand the BRICS. Well, Russia obviously is on a global hunt for allies to support it at an international level. So it would have preferred probably a more expanded BRICS, but there was no such thing at Kazan 2024, despite countries such as Malaysia and its Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim having told the foreign minister of Russia that Malaysia would formally apply for membership in the BRICS. So there was this pragmatism. So let us keep the numbers as it is. Yes, we can have BRICS plus, we can have BRICS plus its partners, but let us keep the membership as it is, and then look at what we can do in order to be more assertive on the global stage. And obviously, an expansion would have diluted the influence of new members, Ethiopia, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and Iran. So it was kind of pragmatic on that, and BRICS deserved to be praised on particular pragmatism. They're not a rush for expansionism. Another thing that I kind of lauded or commended on the BRICS was this exploration of enhancing trade in local currencies. And this also ties in with the interbank coordinating mechanism that the BRICS has come up with. And it also ties in with the new development bank's intent of trying to reach 30% of its local of its trade by 2026 to be done in local currencies. I think that was something that was pragmatic, not overly ambitious, but pragmatic. Let us look at what is there. Let us try and see what we can improve on what we have rather than over promising. And I think making intra-BRICS trade to be more attractive, by providing the options for diversification and reducing exposure, to the risks that are inherent in what is currently happening in international trade. So that was something that deserved commendation as well. And the three pillars, I liked the emphasis on the three pillars of political and security, economic and financial, and then cultural and people-to-people cooperation. I think that was also something that is pragmatic. It's something that can be done because these are just three pillars on which the BRICS can drill in and try to make sure that, yes, they can follow them at a more modest level, so to say. So I think that was a kind of laudable on the part of the BRICS. And obviously, I liked what they said as well about the occupied territory of Palestine. What has been happening in Israel is what has been happening in Gaza is arguably a genocide, and it has to be called as that, despite the United States and Israel trying to push back on that. I thought it was very, very clear on the part of BRICS, and it also enhanced South Africa's importance of South Africa's importance in the BRICS, because it has been the most outspoken champion on the interests of the Palestinian people. So that is what I found to be very commendable in the BRICS. What are my concerns? My concerns are that there was less talk about maritime security. I think the word ocean, if you look at the Kazan Declaration, was only mentioned twice, and in paragraph 90 and in paragraph 112. I think that was quite irresponsible on the part of the BRICS. They should probably put more emphasis on that, especially if you look at the countries, the geographic locations of the countries that have joined the BRICS, and obviously the debilitating effects that terrorism and piracy might have on countries such as South Africa and Mozambique, here in Southern Africa. And these are issues that could be talked about as well. And obviously China's own conflict and tension with the Philippines. It is mostly tailored towards the sovereignty of the South China Sea. And that came to a head, by the way, last week, Sunday, when China issued a strong warning after Philippines claimed territory of South China Sea. So I thought that was an oversight on the part of the BRICS. They should have talked about maritime security more than they actually did. They are tiptoed as well around the issue of Russia and its territory on Ukraine and its war in Ukraine. The word Ukraine again was mentioned only once in the Kazan Declaration. I think that was a blemish. They should have been as forceful as they were when they talked about the Palestine issue. Now I understand, because Russia was the host and South Africa. We know that South Africa has had this confused and confusing foreign policy when it comes to occupation. On the one side, you are against Israel occupation of Palestine, but on the other side, you are vacillating and pussyfooting when it comes to Russia's territorial claims over the Crimean Peninsula, the Donbas region, and the war in Ukraine as well. So I thought that was a glaring oversight on the part of the BRICS. If the BRICS wants to be taken as a serious group, so to say, it has to address such difficult issues. But I'll come back to that. To give reasons why that wasn't the case. Another thing as well is that the issue of the issue of de-dollarization as well. I think it has to be spoken about in frank terms. It could work on countries such as, it could work for the benefit of countries such as Russia and Ukraine that seek to so to say, to cushion the effect of global sanctions, the best sanctions from the West. But is the BRICS being dragged to cater to the needs of members such as Russia and Ukraine without really having foresight? So I think that is a debate that should be mentioned. My penultimate point on the concerns as well is just the omission of the Africa Peace Initiative on Russia and Ukraine. There was there was mention of the Arab Peace Initiative on Gaza, but there was no peace initiative, African peace initiative on Africa, on Russia and Ukraine. So that was something that that should be dealt with as well. And we can talk about also the lack of political coordination. What exactly brings the BRICS together? I think apart from the new development bank, the BRICS is an eclectic group of countries. Anyone can join. What would bring, for example, South Africa together with Ukraine, together with Iran? Sorry, what would bring them in one group? Apart from the fact that they want to show that they are providing an alternative to the West. My last points on Africa, and I'm not going to belabor this point because Krish did a wonderful job on that as well. There is a momentum. I think the BRICS provides a momentum for the implementation of the Pan-African payment settlement system. If Africa wants to integrate, we need to be looking at this payment system. This payment system could actually supplement payment systems such as SWIFT and the BRICS cross-border payment system, so that might come in the future. So I thought that was quite important as well. And obviously the expansion of the BRICS members to probably include partners such as Algeria, Uganda, and Nigeria. I think those also could offer more opportunities for Africa, not really at a political level, but in terms of access to global trade and the reformation of the United Nations Security Council and other global governance systems. I will pack it there for now, and I'll be happy to engage in further debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. That was very, very insightful. I mean, walking us through a journey that we believe has been very enlightening. When it comes to the BRICS, you delve deeper more on the geopolitical side as well, which is very, very important. So we are very excited that you're able to share this insight with us. So the next phase is that I'm going to be asking some series of questions, just about 1 or 2 or so questions. And in the course of that, we are also welcoming questions from our participants. So if you have any question that you'd like to ask our speakers regarding the conversation that we're having here today, please do send them through via the Q&A button. And I'll be more than happy to read these questions out to our speakers to address them. So kindly send through your questions. If you would like to speak or make a comment or ask your question by speaking, you can raise your hand. So you can just click on the raise hand icon, and then I will just give you the permission to speak, and then you can make your comments or your questions so that the speakers can address it. So that is how we're going to go. But before that, I'm going to start with Emmanuel. I'm going to stay on you because you did mention a point that fit into the kind of question that I wanted to ask first, which is about the de-dollarization momentum or agenda. I think already you were trying to, you mentioned it about the fact that the new development bank, which is the BRICS former BRICS bank, development bank is trying to ensure about 30% or so, and you said it's very realistic of their trading in local currency instead of the dollar. But in the context of Africa, I mean, my question will be around, of course, you also mentioned the PAPS, the Pan-African Payment System, which Africa has introduced through the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. But as we see, I mean, in Africa, of course, the aim is to boost intra-African trade, which is what the continent has been advocating for. That is why now we have the AFTA happening now, and of course, the introduction of the PAPS. So as we gear up the momentum, as we build on policies and programs that ensures that African trade among ourselves, what do you think should be the approach on this de-dollarization? Should Africa also embrace it? What are the implications of Africa in terms of de-dollarizing, in terms of impact on trade and economic development, and what have you, in the context of Africa, our own regional integration agenda when it comes to building the common market, the free continental market? So what will be the position of Africa in terms of de-dollarization? How does the BRICS agenda fit into what Africa should be thinking about, when we all know, of course, we all understand the impact of dollar on most economies and almost every economy in Africa when it comes to the exchange rate, because of the demand, because almost everything in dollar. So we want to get your perspective on that, in terms of the BRICS ambition, 30%, and Africa's own development in terms of integration and trade, and how we can find a balance in taking inspiration from the BRICS here.
Well, thank you very much for When it comes to the issue of de-dollarization, first of all, we have to be realistic about what is currently obtaining in the world. And we have to pay attention to the fact that we have to acknowledge the fact that BRICS members, such as Brazil, we can talk about uh, India, we can talk about China, these are countries that have developed under the auspices of the dollar being the global reserve for trade. So there are countries even within the BRICS itself that have benefited from that. What I would want to see on the part of Africa is just realism. And why exactly are we calling for de-dollarization? Are we calling for de-dollarization because we are being railroaded by someone else's agenda? I already mentioned the fact that de-dollarization would actually work for the benefit of countries such as Russia and countries such as Iran because they are under enormous sanctions that have limited the room for maneuver through which they can carry out their trade. That is why we saw Russia mooting the idea of trade that is pegged to grain exports and imports, for example. So is Africa, for example, being sold onto the agenda of other countries? That is the first thing that we should ask ourselves. The second thing that we should ask ourselves obviously is just what are the benefits of de-dollarization in the long run? It can actually boost African continental intra-African trade, but in the long run. At the moment, we have to be realistic and say this is the hand that global trade has been dealt to Africa. So I am not like all the rest of the people who look at the BRICS as an alternative to the World Bank, for example, as an alternative to the IMF. It is there to supplement the payment system that is there already. So that is the realistic angle from which Africa could look at the issue of de-dollarization. It should not be railroaded into the agendas of countries that are under Western sanctions. So we should look at that. We should be more realistic, but obviously we should be exploring ways through which we can lessen the risk of exposure that we have to the whims and the fickle nature of global international trade. So I am not really sold to an impulsive rejection of the dollar. I'm more realistic on the fact that yes, within the global trade as it has happened, there are areas of cooperation, and we need to be frank and candid about some of the stopgaps that have actually neutered intra-African trade. Intra-African trade has not been undermined solely because Africa is whimsically or dangerously exposed to the dollar-based economy. Intra-African trade has been undermined by the lack of infrastructure, the lack of investor confidence on the African continent, and obviously the prevailing insecurity that undermines investor confidence on the continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. I think your point is very much a very potent one. I mean, of course, whilst we are not refuting the fact that the dollar has, is having, impact on many economies. Of course, in my country, Ghana, we have to deal with, still dealing with, very high, exchange rates. I mean, when it comes to the dollar, I mean, the currency, Ghanaian cedi has been weakening for some time now as a result of this very issue about the dollar. But of course, as you mentioned, there are fundamental issues that need to be addressed, and also our interest in reducing our dependence on the dollar should be based on our own economic underpinnings, not because of a campaign run by someone that we have no idea what their motives are. So I think it's very important to, as you said, be realistic when it comes to the reliance on the dollar. We need to ensure that we have those structures and have the alternative of building the economies that can eventually lead us to reduce our reliance on the dollar. I think it's very important. If Chris will want to add something, but I have a question for you. Then maybe if you want to speak on the de-dollarization, you can also make a comment. But my question to you, I mean, which you can also comment on the first question, is about knowledge sharing and exchanges and best practices. I think in your presentation, you did mention about some of the opportunities that, or how Africa can collaborate on the BRICS, in terms of knowledge sharing. I just wanted to know, what framework will work for Africa, when it comes to best practices in knowledge exchange and collaboration when it comes to the BRICS. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Paul. I think the important point here is that we've got to institutionalize our systems so that we are prepared, we are organized, that we can engage with the relevant fora. So I mentioned the different structures that BRICS follows, which takes them to the lead of um, the heads of state summit, which happens every year, and then every year you have a series of forums um, where you have the BRICS Think Tank Council meets, you have the BRICS Academic Forum, you have the BRICS Business Council, you have BRICS Civil Society, you have BRICS Parliament, you have BRICS Finance, and so on and so on and so on. And each one of those have subsystems which relate to them. And so there's a process that goes in there. And when you engage with your Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they usually help you, they identify who's the lead, and then they help identify participants that could then enroll in that. So we have to now work closely with our governments so that we do have that pipeline that's going in there. But it means that if it comes to academia, for instance, we've got to be organized as an academic sector so that we've got to have our researchers working on topics which are relevant to the BRICS priority. So we've got to find that intersection between what's important in our country and what's important on the African level, and then how does that intersect with what the BRICS interest is, and then have that through line which goes through them. But we've also got to then think about how we engage, bring these insights back home. And so we need to have structures where we can have discussions like this, where we can share information which comes out from these international engagements. And I think we need to get more innovative in the way we collect information amongst us, the way we do our research. It's all important, part of the whole knowledge sharing framework that we need to have in our countries. Something that I've noticed, particularly in the BRICS space, and coming out of this recent new study that I'm doing, is that culture is so important as well. We've got to recognize also in the BRICS space, we are 10 at the moment. BRICS is no longer an acronym, as they say. It's a brand. And so we are now about 10 countries that there. If you look at partner nations, we're up to like 23, I think it is. So BRICS is growing and growing, and each country has a different context, different cultural perspective. And so we've also got to, when it comes to knowledge sharing, overcoming those cultural barriers, those language barriers is very important as well. And so we need to be investing in staff, in people that are familiar with the other cultural contexts, that understand what's worked there, so that we can engage with them and find those commonalities in our work. So we've got to think about that level of integration as well when we're talking about working with BRICS. But yeah, for me, the big point really is the institutionalization, having those structures in place so that we can feed into those different systems that are in play. On the point about de-dollarization, I mean, it's a balancing act right now. We've got to think that much of our debt currently is already dollar-based. And so if we want to shift away and we want to introduce new trade agreements in our own currencies or some other currency perhaps, we've got to think about what that might mean for our current agreements and how that changes relations with the US in particular. So it really is a balancing act, and so we have to think carefully about this. But for me, there are many key benefits for us if we do shift towards de-dollarization. In some of the work that we've done, we've seen how difficult it is for new projects to get launched when they're trying to get international funding. International funding comes in dollar-based loans, and you try to make a business plan around that, and it's up and down, and you can't predict what your project is actually going to cost you at the end of the day. And it's that unpredictability also is a big factor as to why projects don't actually get as successful as we can. So we're shifting away from that, coming up with more innovative ways of us accessing international finance, I think, is key. And de-dollarization is a path to that. Thank Thanks,
Very
Paul.
much, Krish. I think you did mention a point that I would have come to in terms of the culture, dynamics, the culture, the role of culture in terms of the knowledge exchange with the BRICS, as you mentioned. Now that the number is increasing, I think paying a particular attention to the cultural difference also would be very key in terms of how countries in Africa can really deal with the BRICS bloc. Now, my question before I go to the question that have been sent through by our attendee, it's about debts and debt sustainability in Africa. Emmanuel, maybe I'll come to you. Of course, in recent times, we've seen, the rise in numbers in terms of African countries that are dealing with debt at various levels. Countries being, being classified debt distress, and of course, leading to debt restructuring in some countries. Some countries now need the IMF bailout, like my country, Ghana. We're currently under IMF bailouts and all of that. So this is a reality on the continent. But then again, as you know, the gap in financing infrastructure is also there. It's very huge, the continent needing about $170 to $190 billion each year for the next decade or so to finance the infrastructure gap. So obviously, there's still the need to invest in critical infrastructure, amidst debts, rise in debt. And of course, as you see, the new development bank of the BRICS also offers opportunities in terms of financing. Of course, even the BRICS countries like China, like India, and all of them are also offering and their own opportunities. Like China, we all know the Belt and Road Initiative. But so my question is, in this context, what will be the approach for Africa? Looking at the fact that we might have access to new funding, from this bloc to invest in infrastructure, and then also dealing with debts. What will be the best approach going forward? Africa and the BRICS and the debt sustainability discussion on the continent. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for that question there. When it comes to the issue of infrastructure, I'll just take it from what you have mentioned. I think, yes, indeed, it remains one of the banes of Africa's development, actually. The figure about 5 years ago was 100 to 130 billion, but it has now since ballooned to much more than that a year. Probably the only positive part about Africa's infrastructure deficit was that the continent was contributing the most in terms of infrastructure funding on the African continent. But obviously, that was not enough. I think by up to 2019, if we looked at the continent's overall GDP, we were only contributing about 3.7% of that GDP to infrastructure. I think it was nowhere near enough if we want to have a continent that is integrated. So that was very concerning. When it comes to how the BRICS could feature into that particular infrastructure deficit, I think that has happened more at a bilateral level between African countries and certain BRICS members, chiefly China, and also at the level of the African Union. We have seen China being enlisted in some of the projects that are under the framework of Agenda 2063 to make sure that the continent is integrated in terms of infrastructure. So that, I think, could happen more at the level of that has been happening more realistically at the level of individual BRICS members. Obviously, it would help if we could earn more infrastructure funding from the from the new development bank itself. It was quite heartening this year in August when the new development bank signed a deal with South Africa's railway coordinator, the company called Transnet, and that was a $5 billion United States dollars deal. It will help to alleviate what is almost rapidly becoming a defunct industry, rail infrastructure in South Africa. So that obviously, if it could be expanded to the rest of the African continent, it would help. Although we have to realize though that the new development bank as a funding mechanism usually funds according to the market rates. It does not offer concessional loans that China historically offered to individual African countries. So that is how I can deal with the issue of infrastructure. Obviously, we can debate more about the sustainability of debt contraction in terms of infrastructure. We have seen the mess that Kenya is in now, and people are taking a very dim and cynical view of the standard gauge railway in Kenya. It is an infrastructure installment that has great potential, but the dividends have been slow in coming, and obviously the opacity that characterized the debt contraction as well there has not helped the situation. So obviously, if Africa can work under the umbrella of the African Union, then we could see that yes, there could be more alleviation of Africa's infrastructure deficits. When it comes to the issue of debt, it is such a distressing issue because, as you have rightly noted, Ghana has defaulted. Another country that has defaulted is Ethiopia. Another country that has defaulted as well is Zambia. I think this is an issue more of internal governance in individual African countries. I can speak more authoritatively on this issue about Zambia because in 2018, during the previous government that was voted out of power in 2021, in 2018, the IMF country representative, Alfredo Bodini, warned the Zambian government actually that your debt contraction is not sustainable. And 33% of Zambia's external debt was owed to China, and there was no really clear roadmap on how Zambia would pay that particular debt to China. And what happened? Instead of heeding what I thought was level-headed advice, the Minister of Communication then at the time told the Zambian people quite peevishly that the Zambian government had asked the IMF to withdraw Alfredo Bodini because he was not being helpful, so to say. And what happened in the long run? In the long run, Alfredo Bodini was actually proved correct because 2 years, 3 years after his what I think was wise advice, Zambia defaulted. So the issue of debt should really be dealt with at the moment at the local level, and that obviously should bring in how the academic space, the economic space, the civil society space, and ordinary African citizens could hold their countries to account. China and the BRICS countries and the new development banks cannot be counted upon as Santa Claus who have the bottomless pit from which Africa could draw its debt. So that is the responsibility that Africa should take individually in African countries that are unsustainably contracting this debt. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think borrower responsibility is always a very core part of the discussion, and I'm also very much in support of that. I mean, when these debt-related crisis rises, we just box all the blame and just lump it up and just shift abroad to the lenders. So, but the borrowers are usually excluded because when you interrogate, you can see that recklessness, in terms of the management of the finances of these countries. There are a lot of questions to be raised there, and so borrower responsibility is very key when it comes to the debt discussion that we are having on Africa. So we always have to come up, in trying to interrogate the respective governments and what they've done, what they should have done, and what they didn't do, and all the wrongs that they did in order to get them to find themselves where they are. I think these are all very important inquiries to be made as researchers or as thinkers when it comes to the discussion. Yeah, so I very much agree with you on that. So I'll come to Krish, but before that, okay, let me just ask this question, or I should just read the question here. So it's also on knowledge sharing and experiences as well. As we know, most of these BRICS countries that we have, of course, notably China, Russia, and India, have experience navigating the global trade, dynamics. These are our experience. China, as we know, has joined the WTO, and of course, ever since we all know what China's role is in terms of global trade now. Russia as well, after all, a lot of sanctions, a lot of risk that they're exposed to, but they still find themselves playing a key part in terms of trade around our world today. So I just wanted to ask, when Africa is also pursuing its own trade agenda through the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, is there any way that you see some form of experience sharing or knowledge, between the Africans' own journey of navigating this global trade dynamics through the African continent, and what some of these BRICS countries are already done, and I'm sure have been successful in the case of China being a very major player in the global trade now. So, and what would be the ways to deal with this issue? And then I will tie that in with a question that has been raised by anonymous attendee here, asking about, how would African nations navigate the complexity of aligning with BRICS whilst maintaining relationship with the Western powers. So, BRICS, as we know, global South, kind of bloc. We have the Western side, of course, led by US and the EU. And then, of course, you have Africa. So it's kind of how these dynamics play out on what will be Africa's way, in terms of dealing with these two blocks, sort of. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So what can we learn from our BRICS countries, and as we trying to navigate these new trade agreements? I think if you look at each of the original BRICS, at least, they've been able to build strong relationships in their particular regions. You've got the ASEAN region in that China is connected to Southeast Asia. You look at Mercosur with Brazil. They've been able to build these dynamics, and so there's many deep insights, I guess, that we could draw from them about how these networks have been able to build, and how the African Trade Agreement perhaps could try and replicate some of these. We've got to look at what are the best practices from each of them, and then see what fits within our context. If we look specifically at China and India, they've looked largely at export-oriented growth. And so that's been their trade policy. And so we've got to figure out, what does that mean for us in the African continent? Is how do we integrate our businesses into the global value chain? What similar approaches can we replicate from the likes of India and China and Brazil? That will help us to adopt similar approaches, and improve the competitiveness also of our local industries. So there's a lot of knowledge sharing, I think, that needs to also happen at the industrial level. So business to business connections need to be built across each of our countries. And so more than just understanding how the trade agreement fits in place, we've got to think about how do we improve the competitiveness of our businesses, so that we can then feed into these, or fit into these broader institutional arrangements that need to be structured. And I think we also we need to do some more deeper research into understanding the where we align with these other regional blocks, and what are the similarities, and what are the lessons that we can draw from them. I missed the second question, Paul. I didn't catch it. You're on mute.
The question is about Africa navigating between the BRICS and then, of course, Western powers in terms of relations. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's an interesting moment. I mean, Emmanuel was saying something similar earlier. We are at this really pivotal moment, I think, in world affairs right now, and perhaps we feel very much forgotten on the African continent, but it seems the attention is now shifting back to Africa. It's that we must, I guess, remember that we do hold some of the cards. Yeah, we have the resources that are in demand for the new global economy, and so we have more negotiating power than perhaps we realize. And so we've got to be able to work out the best agreements which shed some of the constraints that we've had in the past. We've got to think about what will matter most for us in the current context, and then negotiate along those lines. And I think we need to move away from the exporting of raw materials, and think about how we build industries, and so that we can develop those more productive industries and services that would be useful in the global market.
Okay, thank you very much, Krish. Emmanuel, I think this question I'll ask you. I'm going to combine two questions. So this is from Eric J. Rungu. So Eric is saying that in a rapidly changing and shifting international system, does BRICS provide a viable alternative towards the continent economic growth and development? So that's the question. But then I also want to add a question from Akwesi, who is asking, what will BRICS also benefit from Africa? So the first question is asking about BRICS being a viable alternative for Africa's economic development, but also the other part of it is also asking what exactly is in it for BRICS and Africa in terms of also the BRICS countries' economic growth and development. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Eric, for that particular question there. Does BRICS provide a viable alternative to economic growth and development? That is, several books have actually been written about that particular topic, including one book that was written by our center here. I think, yes, BRICS, the simple question there is just yes. I think BRICS, especially through the New Development Bank, which was launched in 2015, it provides an alternative source for funding. But a lot of times, I think, especially as people in the developing world and in Africa in particular, we usually mistake the word alternative to better. We usually think as if, okay, probably we would have better concessions at the BRICS Bank than we would have at the World Bank, for example. The truth, as it could, lies slightly away from that. In as much as negotiation, the time for negotiations with the New Development Bank seems to be shorter than the time for negotiating with the IMF. Zambia, for example, has been negotiating with the IMF since 2019. But then the New Development Bank could provide an expedited time frame, so to say, for economic injection on the African continent. So yes, BRICS provide that particular alternative. Another way of answering that particular question, especially when you look at the political angle, there is alternative does not always mean better. Alternative does not always mean more morally defensive, because obviously I mentioned in my first remarks there about some of the concerns that I had about BRICS, for example. How does it define itself, for example, after the inclusion of Iran, and obviously the extended invitation to Saudi Arabia? So yes, there is an alternative, but the moral value and the interest that you add on that alternative is really up to you. What will BRICS benefit from Africa? I liked what Joe Biden said when he was calling for the U.S. Africa Democracy Summit. He said the future of Africa is the future of the world. And I think that I would actually add that is actually in a literal sense. We are the youngest continent. We have strategic minerals such as cobalt in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We also add a lot of cover, a diplomatic cover and political cover to global world politics. South Africa carries a certain moral appeal, so to say. That is why it took it upon itself, for example, to take Israel to the International Court of Justice, because there is a certain moral appeal that South Africa has in its foreign policy. And to some extent, by the way, when South Africa was invited to join the BRICS in 2010, a lot of people interpreted that as China's way and the other BRICS countries' ways, for example, to present the BRICS as being not just a group of countries that was reacting against the West, but also a group of countries that could attract thriving and vibrant democracies from Africa. So that is what Africa offers to the BRICS. It offers a very young population. It offers a strategic positioning in terms of the countries that have been invited now to the BRICS. We look at Ethiopia, strategically placed on the African continent. Egypt, the same thing. South Africa is the same thing. And on top of that, it offers access to strategic minerals that the international system desperately needs. And that is why after the BRICS expansion last year, a few weeks after, we saw the inclusion of the African Union as part of the G20. So all that just underscores the fact that Africa is of tremendous importance, not only to the BRICS, but to the global international system in general.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel, for that insight to respond to that question. I think Africa's role, position, and how significant it is to the BRICS is very much in the known, and I think it's something that the continent really needs to delve deeper to explore leverage on that, which is always about leverage, knowing what you have and leverage on it to get what you want. I think that is the conversation that as researchers, you need to research on and push to the policy dynamics of the continent in dealing with blocs like the BRICS, or countries like China, or blocs like the EU, the US as a country. So I think these are very insightful instructions. Krish, I saw that you're trying to answer some of the questions online. I don't know whether you have one that you'd like to comment on. You can do that so that we can be wrapping up very soon. So yeah.
I was just trying to organize the questions. I see there's quite a few there. So
Yeah.
I saw the two that were answered, so I just pushed them
Okay.
to the answered side. There was a question about the parliamentary engagement, the different forums that are coming in. I think that's an interesting new development that we are also seeing in the BRICS space. Last year, I attended a BRICS parliamentary forum in Johannesburg. And so you had members from BRICS parliaments from across these countries coming to Johannesburg, and we're talking about how do we turn BRICS commitments into legislation, into policy. And so this is a new space, and it's an interesting point about how do we engage at that level, and then how are people represented within BRICS? So if your parliament is supposed to be the voice of people, then they've got to be able to negotiate and debate these commitments that are being made by the heads of states, because you have this top-down infrastructure or top-down commitments that are being made, and so then your governments have to play it out. But the question is this really what people are demanding or require? And so it's interesting to see now the BRICS Parliamentary Forum coming into that space. And so it'd be nice for us to be able to see some more connections between the African Union, each of the regions on the continent, how these different fora that are being established for our parliamentarians to engage, for those processes to also now integrate with BRICS. It's becoming a very complicated picture, but this is the complexity of what this whole multipolar world means, and how we all have a voice and engage in the system. So it's something that's developing, but yeah, I think it's a positive development that we're seeing.
All right, sure. Thank you very much, Chris. So there's a question from an anonymous attendee. So the question is, can we expect more African countries to indicate interest in joining the BRICS in the light of its expansion and growing opportunities? All could issues such as South China Sea, Russia-Ukraine war, these are all issues mentioned by Emmanuel, which are hardly addressed in BRICS discussion, impact broadening African membership in the bloc. So Emmanuel, I think this question, if you want to comment on it, about whether there's an appetite, or whether we should expect, the appetite of African countries in joining the BRICS from where you sit, how do you gauge that appetite? Where is it now? What level, and anything that is impacting that? Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Anonymous. Yes, there has been a lot of interest from African countries to join the BRICS. Actually, in 2023, a lot of people speculated that Nigeria would join the BRICS when it was expanded in 2023, but obviously that did not happen. And another issue that could actually enhance Africa's interest, not only informally joining the BRICS, but in aligning with the BRICS, is the return to military leaderships that we have seen across the continent. And there has been this gravitation, so to say, by military leaderships towards Russia. So that at a bilateral level, obviously, we will draw a lot of these countries that have seized power to be closer, to be approaching Russia's orbit, so to say. But I'll link my response as well to the preamble that I gave in my opening remarks there, that one of the pragmatic things that happened at Kazan in 2024 was the fact that the BRICS did not precipitately say we are accumulating more members. No, they wanted to make sure that they concretize the BRICS Plus and BRICS Plus its partners, and those there will be more interest in that. And then about the South China Sea, I already alluded to that as well as one of the elephants in the room that was not attended to at the BRICS 2024. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. So we'll be running up very soon. So there's a comment here. I think Sisa Njikelana. I don't know whether Emmanuel, you know this person. So I think maybe addition to what Emmanuel said, so Sisa is saying that, in fact, the campaign for de-dollarization started before the sanctions against Russia, China, and Iran. There has been quite sizable experience regarding unfavorable impact from a dollar-based global trade. Another example is after using the dollar for continental trade, surely we should assess the impact of trade using alternative country-based currencies. Experience into the future will guide, and of course, we need to tread carefully since the initiative is not about to stop. So yeah, I mean, that's a comment from Caesar. Thank you very much for contributing. I saw someone raise their hand earlier. I don't know whether the person will still want to come in. So there's a question here. I think, Emmanuel, you mentioned maritime insecurity. I don't know whether you that mentioned. So someone is asking, why is maritime insecurity silent in BRICS? I think you've already given us one of the key things that you found very interesting. So we just leave it like that. So we will welcome you to send through your questions. I mean, we are about wrapping up today's discussion. It's been very insightful so far. So at this point, I wouldn't want to pass an hour now. That's the time that we already scheduled to have. So at this point, I will just welcome our speakers to give their closing remarks. If there are any outstanding issues that any of them wants to bring in, we are welcome to do so. So let me start with you. Since you started, so if you can give your final perspective on this discussion, and then we can wrap up with him.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, and thanks to everyone for joining today, sharing these detailed questions with us in the chat. I think it's very thought-provoking, and I welcome it. And I think it's a very positive experience for us to now see that I think this BRICS expansion is taking place, and there's opportunities for African countries to voice their opinions and demands on a new global stage. The question for us, I think, is how do we organize ourselves so that we make use of these opportunities that come? We were talking a lot about infrastructure today, and what do these new loans actually mean for us? The whole aim for us expanding our infrastructure is to boost our economic activity. And then with boosting the economic activity, we assume we're going to be increasing the amount of available income so that we can then provide better services to our people. But then the question is, where are we actually increasing economic activity? If our economic activity remains informal, which I think the majority of it is on the continent, we're not going to see that rise in the tax base. And so these are very complicated issues where you can't just upgrade your infrastructure and expect it to resolve problems. You've got to now come up with targeted solutions to solve very specific problems related to inclusive economic growth. And so we need strategies that focus on both of these things, and then that will put us in a better space. But thank you, Paul, for this conversation. Thanks to everyone for participating today and showing such interest. I think it really augurs well for our future.
Thank you very much, Krish. Emmanuel, you will come in, but I think your comment, I wanted to tie into some question here that I think is very interesting. It came from Caesar. I think I skipped that part. So you just try to comment on that, and you can wrap up with your last comment. So it's asking about maybe there's any other than any criteria for endorsing membership into BRICS, and also what about the BRICS countries that have relations that are more likely locked with the West, and they also how does that impact exposes your BRICS as a bloc. Because as you see, I have a relationship with the BRICS, and of course, I'm also locked up with the West, in one way or the other. So how does that, relations, for these members that I have an overlapping kind of relations work in the BRICS, and of course, if there's any criteria in terms of that. So you can wrap up this, with your last comment here.
Thank you very much. So I'll start the question from the last thing you said, and then I'll walk it backwards. About what are countries that have intersection affinities, both with the BRICS and with the West. That is already happening. And India has done that quite dexterously. It has done very well in terms of that, especially now with the return of Donald Trump as president of the United States next year. We'll actually see India drawing even closer to the United States than has been the case in the last 4 years. I don't think that has been a big problem for India. South Africa, where I'm sitting at the moment, same thing. South Africa was almost ejected from AGOA in the United States, partly because of its stance on Ukraine and its stance on Israel as well. But it dispatched several ministers to go to the United States to go and carry out a diplomatic negotiations so that it remains in AGOA, and it has remained in AGOA. And what I think enhances countries to have that is that BRICS is not a formal group. I think we tend to forget this. BRICS is not a formal group in the way that other groups are formal groups where you have a secretariat. It doesn't even have a secretariat. It only has a new development bank. And because of that, there's no strict criteria to who can join. But I can safely say that the joining of Ethiopia and Egypt last year was mostly tailored towards, are they going to support the reformation of the United Nations Security Council? So that is what was apparently agreed upon, but Ethiopia and Egypt walked back when they were at the United Nations General Assembly in September. Yes, when it comes to de-dollarization, again, let us have foresight. That is what I can say, not just precipitately jettisoning the dollar because we want to dodge sanctions and all that. And then we also do not want to repay the debt that we already owe in dollars. My final remarks are just this. First of all, thanks to everyone who attended. I know those who are in Africa, you had to carve out this awkward time during your work hours. So thank you so much. And thanks so much to Paul and the people at the Africa-China Center for Policy and Advisory. Going forward, yes, in as much as the BRICS offers us an alternative, let us not go to the BRICS because we are lazy or we do not want to attend to some of the shortcomings that we have, such as proper governance in Africa, responsive governance in Africa as well, and the entrenchment of democracy. If multi-party democracy is what we want, then let us go for it. If multilateralism is what we want, then let us go for it. Let us not use the BRICS in order to dodge what other responsibilities that we might have, especially to ordinary Africans. And yes, let us make sure that we recommit ourselves to multilateralism, despite what might happen after January 2025. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel, and thank you very much, Krish. We appreciate you guys so much for making time to join us. I think it's been very much insightful discussion that we had here today. On behalf of the ACCPA, we say a big thank you to you, and of course also thank our participants that are still online. I think we had almost 99% of participants staying through since we began, and it's been very impressive. We just want to say thank you from wherever you join us from. The session has been recorded, so in due time we'll make it available on our YouTube channel, and then we share it by email as well. So you can re-watch it or share with your other contacts, or maybe use it for your own further edification or research that you have. I believe the insight here will be very helpful to you going forward. So thank you, everyone. This has been brought to you by the ACCPA, and we hope to come your way again with our series of virtual dialogues that we've been having over the years. So thank you, and speak to you or see you soon. Until then, bye-bye.